So, what happens to education savings when you receive an inheritance, or a child decides they want to go find themselves in Central America, or they want to be a carpenter? The reality is we can foresee those things when children are maybe 16 or 17 a whole lot easier when they're 3, 4, or 5. So, we want to explore a couple of options or just some scenarios that maybe make these investment opportunities a little bit more digestible.
Today we're going to build on the last episode that we did, which was related to educational savings vehicles. We talked about 529 plans, we talked about Roth IRAs and unqualified accounts and how you could use those and some of the trade-offs that you face. But we're actually going to give some examples of families today, and hopefully this will give you an idea of how we would start to evaluate what a particular path might be best. So every circumstance is unique. And as we work with families, we really try to digest all the different variables. This is one of the most complex areas because oftentimes really assigning a goal of how much we're saving is difficult because if we've got a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old or a newborn, we don't really know in a lot of ways where they're going to end up. So it feels so far off in that sense. As we get into this, we're going to profile 3 different families. We're going to go with the Gamgees, the Tooks, and the Brandybucks. So a little bit of a nod towards the mythical world here, but we'll be unpacking those. So Austin, as you think about these different families, you dive into this first one.
Yeah, so we want to start off with the Gamgees. And really, as we think about each of these families, there's going to be a primary thing that makes the most sense. But there's always going to be other trade-offs that we have to consider. Just like we talked about in that last episode, there's always trade-offs to each of these accounts. So we're going to kind of look at the Gamgees. We're going to start off with, they've got Sam Jr. and they've got Daisy, or their 2 kids. And there's a high likelihood that both kids are going to go to college, and Sam and Rosie want to help their children out. They want to set aside about $30,000 a year to help each of the kids. Their parents are lucky because a good friend just left them millions of dollars in a lump sum inheritance just before he left to go off to the Grey Havens. So they really are thinking about how can we get these dollars pushed to our kids' education as efficiently as possible. So Spencer, what are some things that they want to consider?
Well, anytime we hear we've got a lump sum of cash and we know that we're going to use it for educational expenses, we think 529 plan. Because that 529 plan is going to align perfectly in that sense. We don't get a tax write-off up front other than maybe a small one for the state taxes if we are in a state that has state income taxes and provides a tax deduction there. But again, it's that gain of the investments that if we can get that tax-free, because if these kids, we know they're headed to college and we want to pay for a significant piece of that, and even if we think they're Ivy League headed in that direction and maybe we just want to be able to pay for half of it, then we've got some margin of safety in there. Now, the flip side is that we've always got some trade-offs. So other things that you would think there.
Yeah, so let's think about Sam Jr. Mm-hmm. He may be exploring maybe a military academy, or Daisy, she may just want to go to a local undergrad, but then may want to go to a graduate or become a physician. So she's got a long track thereafter to pay for her medical school. And so there's a lot of trade-offs as we think about that, because if Sam Jr. doesn't need any funding, then again, we come back to that overfunding question. Can you put too much in a 529 plan? Yeah, you can. And so where is that line that you draw? And then you kind of start thinking, well, if we do set up 2 different accounts, one for Sam Jr. and one for Daisy, then if Sam doesn't use his, then we can just transfer the beneficiary to be Daisy for her education purposes.
Well, and we think even about the military academy. So if we have a student that is academically or athletically talented, they get a scholarship, or they head to a military academy, there is an allowance to be able to take distributions from that 529 account without penalty. Now, you still pay ordinary income tax on the gain amount that you would withdraw, but you avoid that 10% penalty. So there are some provisions in there that I think the government has put in place to say, well, if your kid is kind of an overachiever and you don't need the funds, but they're still going to college, then you shouldn't be penalized in quite the same way. So that's more treating it as kind of a non-qualified variable annuity type of taxation, which, isn't all that bad, really. Second family, where are we going here?
Yeah, so this family, we're going with the Tooks. They've got Peregrine Jr. He works with his hands, he's really funny, and he wants to be a comedian, which is great if that's what he wants to do. However, his parents want him to go to college, but they know that might not be in the cards. So they'd like to have about $40,000 or so to help him with his needs, whether that is to pursue this comedic dream or whether it is to go to college, or maybe it's a trade school for him. There's a lot of opportunities, but several of those may not have educational vehicle savings directly. The parents also want to be able to save pretty aggressively towards their own retirement. So what would you suggest in that situation?
Well, I think in this one, it makes a lot of sense to explore the Roth IRA. We come back to a Roth IRA oftentimes when there's less clarity about the goal, and the goal is within the realm of capacity to be able to save kind of in that Roth vehicle. Now, if we were saying, well, we want to set aside $200,000, there's limits to how much you can really get into a Roth via principal contributions. But if we're thinking about $40,000, really, that's if we just maxed out Roth contributions for each parent for a couple of years, we get close to that amount. So that's a possibility. Now, if they needed to think through some additional type of savings, then maybe they even go above and beyond that Roth type of contribution, and they've got some resources in a non-qualified account. But this is the one that's really flexible, and so for some families that aren't really sure the trajectory of their kids, and maybe the desire to save is a little bit lower, oftentimes we can satisfy that with a Roth. Now, there is a little bit of a gotcha with a Roth. You want to talk about that in terms of how we look at financial aid and those Roth distributions?
Yeah, so just like we talked about last episode with that financial aid and Roth, if you do take a Roth distribution, it's going to show up on the FAFSA as a tax-free distribution. And so really you got to be aware, if your student is receiving need-based financial aid, then that could penalize you because you're taking in that income. Though it's tax-free income, because it's a return of principal, you're still receiving it as a distribution. So you have to report it on the FAFSA. So we really want to think, if you do those, take those in those last 2 years so that you don't affect the financial aid should your child actually decide that they want to go.
Right. The last family unit, we're going to do a little bit of a change here in that it's not the parents that are saving. Now we've got the grandparents saving, and this is the Brandy Bucks.
Yeah.
So as we think about the Brandy Bucks, they're saving for grandkids. They've got 3 of them here. We're going to call them Maria, Doc Jr., Pearl, and Dory, and that they want to pass on $75,000 apiece there. And we also want to say, kind of in the framework, that they're pretty comfortable with a fairly aggressive set of investments. They're what we like to joke around with clients as they're getting greedy for the grandkids, being aggressive in stock investments, hoping to be able to pass on as much as they can in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So what are our considerations there?
Well, yeah, so if we're thinking that they want to just pass on resources, maybe it's not just education. So maybe parents are also saving for their children's education. So we don't know necessarily what these funds are going to be used for. They may be used for home down payments. They may be used for weddings. So when there's a whole lot of flexibility that's needed, a non-qualified account makes a whole lot of sense. Grandparents can put in as much money as they want into these non-qualified accounts. They can be as aggressive as they want. And as those accounts grow, yes, the grandparents are going to have to pay taxes annually. But if they don't take those distributions for themselves, if they pass away and pass those resources along, there's a step up in that cost basis. They can also just go ahead and make the sales and give the cash to kids or grandkids. The other thing that's really nice is there's that $17,000 annual gift exclusion that the IRS isn't going to ask for. But if grandparents decide, hey, I want to pay the educational institution directly, then there's no gift limitation on that. So if their grandchild, let's say Pearl, decides she wants to go to Harvard, and grandparents have $75,000 set aside for her, well, tuition for Harvard is going to be more than that $17,000 gift exclusion. If the Brandy Bucks in that situation go ahead and sell some of their appreciated stock, pay the tax on it, they can then pay as much to Harvard as they want in terms of that for her tuition and not be penalized for a gift tax.
The other thing that they can do is they can gift those shares in kind to their grandkids if there's a high level of character, with these kids, and they know that those resources will be used as their intention would be. They can gift highly appreciated shares. So let's say, grandmother and grandfather gift $34,000 of Apple stock. The cost basis is only $1,000 because they've grown substantially. Well, if grandma and grandpa sold those at $33,000 of gain, as we talked about last time, something like 20 or even 24% tax, you might be paying $6,000, $7,000 of tax there. Grandkids take it, they file their own return. Well, now we're in business because we've made that gift. There's nothing that needs to be, reported or recorded for the amount that they're gifting there. And then they've got a capacity to sell it and not have any capital gains. So it can be just as efficient or almost as efficient as a 529 plan if we can get our ducks in a row there and if the resources indeed are invested in stocks that are going to be more tax efficient to begin with.
And I think a key point there is, are the children or the grandchildren at that point, can they control those resources? I think about some kids that if they were to receive $34,000 of stock from a grandparent, and even if the grandparent said this needs to be used for education, there's some grandkids that may not do that. And so you have to be willing to release the control of that gift and trust that the grandchildren is going to do what you desire for it. So there's just another level of trust that needs to be there with those non-qualified resources if you're going to kind of gift those shares.
Well, and this can be a both and type of scenario. Just like we talked about with the GAMGs, you could use some for 529, invest the rest in non-qualified or get some resources into a Roth. Do the same thing here. So with appreciated stock, certainly makes sense to keep it in a non-qualified oftentimes. But if you have cash, if they had some cash resources that they wanted to be able to pass on, and maybe it was a lesser amount and use it for educational purposes, that might be a nice place to be able to slide some funds over into a 529 account, because now we're starting at a known basis. And if we're going to use a smaller amount for education, we've got some margin of safety in there as well that we're not overfunding like we've talked about.
Spencer, I think the reality here is there's a wide array of option sets. And the one that we didn't really talk about is just cash flow in college, because like we started off in the beginning, if your child is 15 or 16, then you have a little bit more of an idea of where their trajectory is headed than you do as a newborn. So what is this idea of cash flowing?
Well, it's the idea that kids are not pulling their weight. If your kids are anything like mine, they're not paying for all of their expenses as they grow up, and they should be. We're as parents, we are helping them along the way. So that's different for every family. For some families, it might only be a couple $1,000s that their kids they're really investing in their kids. For other families, it may be that they're already, kids cost them $15,000 or $20,000 a year. And so we look at that and we say, okay, well, if they just transition to a state school and you keep your budget the same, that's not changing things drastically. Maybe you need to save a little bit for college. But if you're willing to pay for some of that, just again, out of that cash flow, the budget that's already there for them, oftentimes as we sit down with families, we'll realize that kids are costing them maybe $10,000 a kid a year. And if they want to go to, say, University of Tennessee, and maybe they're projecting that they're going to need $30,000, why, that's a significant sum towards that $30,000 that they might need. That's one of the other key considerations that we'd have.
We hope you enjoyed this video about just those different educational opportunities for saving. Really, again, it's that wide array. So how can we make a plan that narrows down your opportunity set and makes it a little bit more approachable for you? Clients, if this is something you want to talk about, we would love to discuss it more with you, and we'll see you again next time. If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend, and if you have questions, go to our website at seriousretirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at seriousretirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.